fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. Today, I'm here with a new friend to all of you. You're going to know him and love him by the end of this episode. And it's Chris Travis, and he is from Seattle Strength and Performance. Welcome, Chris.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm honored.
Yeah, thanks for being here. You're a brand new Unicorn Society member. I just met you, 6 months ago? And so I think, was that about right? I think that's when it was.
I feel like Boston was like 4 months ago, though. Something like that.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But we were kind of connected. I thought we were connected a little bit before then, but officially saw you in Boston for the first time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, I know this is coming out probably in January, so I'll still keep saying Happy New Year and thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Can you maybe start off by saying a little bit about just briefly your background, because you're relatively new to being a gym owner and you're new to Unicorn Society. So you just want to share a little bit about Seattle Strength and Performance and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. Well, Seattle Strength and Performance is obviously the gym that I own. I have 2 locations in a couple of neighborhoods here in Seattle. We are actually in Seattle. I know some gyms say they're in Seattle and then they're outside of Seattle. We are in neighborhoods of Seattle. My background is kind of interesting. I actually had a whole career in corporate technology before this. So I worked at Amazon for about a decade and a couple other companies before that. Had a whole career in technology that I had built and advanced in and felt really good about. Fitness for me was one of those things where I started on at Amazon in 2010. For people who are unfamiliar with Amazon, it's a pretty intense corporate culture and working environment. I learned a ton, but it definitely takes a lot from you. And so I kind of dedicated my life. I didn't have kids at that point. I had my wife and I, but we were just kind of working a lot. And for the first 4 years of working at Amazon, I just kind of grinded, 80, 90 hour weeks. It was the early days of the Kindle business and I was just going. So during that point, I just completely lost my health. Wasn't eating well, was not exercising and all of that. And then finally decided to join a gym like most people do, and sort of went on my own journey from there. And as I went on that journey, I just got really kind of geeky about my body and how it works and how I was getting strength. And then I got a lot of questions from other people, how are you prioritizing this? How are you doing this?
Yep.
And it just kind of became a bug in my head, and so it had literally nothing to do with Amazon and how much I liked it. It had everything to do with wanting to not have regrets when I'm 80, of not chasing something that I wanted to chase. And so that's kind of how I ended up in this business.
Yeah, fantastic story. I mean, and it's so similar to so many other gym owners that I talked to, that they came to fitness out of a personal need and a personal journey. They were real nerds about it and studied up and really cared a lot about the topic and dug deep into the science in many cases. And then they got a lot of questions and people were seeking them out and they suddenly were helping folks and they suddenly were getting a training certification. And then now you have a gym. Yeah. So I think it's a common story I hear on this podcast. Can you just talk a little bit about Seattle Strength and Performance and what y'all are up to these days?
Yeah. So like I said, we have 2 locations. I actually opened my first location in August of 2020. So mid-pandemic, kind of a crazy ride. And then I opened another one 18 months later in May 2022. And so it's been a wild journey so far. Right now we have at this minute about 370 members across the 2 locations. We've grown really, really fast. And that's not been without its pain points and learning, but it's been a great growth curve for us. We have 6 core values. Our first one is really our main one, which is strength training is for everybody. We care a lot about making strength training accessible, making a gym environment inclusive and accessible. The everybody piece, we really emphasize everybody. I think there's a lot of people that go into different fitness environments and don't feel comfortable for one reason or another because of the way the fitness industry historically may have positioned what fitness and strength looks like. And for us, it's very important to make sure everybody who comes into our gym is comfortable and is able to do what they need to do.
Well said, my friend. I think we need more folks in the industry really pushing that agenda, that everyone's welcome. Strength training's for everyone and everybody. Yeah, good for you. I want to go back to something you said very casually, but I think many of our listeners probably had their jaws drop on the floor, is that you said you opened in late 2019. You already have 2 locations and you already have 370 members. That's pretty big. That's huge. There's a lot of
Yeah.
listeners who are like, damn, I've been open for a decade and I don't have that many members, right?
Yeah.
And every
Yeah.
market's different, right? So, to
Yep.
compare is often to despair, but I think that's really, really impressive. And I want to talk, I think one of the topics we want to start with is talk about how did you decide so quickly to open a second location? And what was that thought process? I know a lot of folks, and some of them in Unicorn Society have been open for a long
Yeah.
time. It took us at MFF maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 years before we took seriously the idea of opening a
Mhm.
second location. And we opened a second one and closed it. And now we're getting ready to open a second one again,
Yeah.
hopefully in the next
Right.
year. Right.
Yeah.
And so often people, a lot of gyms really think for a long time about that kind of expansion. So maybe kind of
Mhm.
walk our listeners through, like, what was your decision-making process to open up a second location within 18 months of your first?
Yeah, it's been a crazy journey. I think when I left Amazon, I always had the intention of opening a gym, but I didn't really
Mhm.
think beyond that, right? And so
Mhm.
I just grinded really hard, and when I left Amazon between then and when I opened the first location, that was kind of my focus. And then the first location, it was battling the pandemic,
Yep.
and closures and all of this stuff, and just trying to build what I thought would be a viable business.
You were right
Thankfully,
in the
that worked
thick of
out.
it. Yeah,
Right in the
you
thick of
were
it. Yeah, it was
yeah.
crazy. Yeah, and so the end of 2021 rolls around, right? And I had hired kind of a good team, and I felt really good about the business, and it was profitable, and these were going well. And then I was doing some self evaluation. It wasn't an easy thing for me to leave technology and a career that I had built there, and all of a sudden do this thing in fitness and health. So honestly, there were certain times where I felt like it was temporary, in
Mm,
my mind, because I hadn't been doing it for very long. And so I had to do a lot of like self evaluation about, is this something I want to be doing? Like now that I built this business, do I want to continue it? Or do I want
yeah.
to maybe hire a GM and go back and go into the corporate life and, have it run as a side business or whatever? I was evaluating a lot of different options. And ultimately I looked at jobs out there, and I was looking and evaluating the pros and cons, and I just didn't like any of the jobs. I didn't want to do any of them, and I just
Mm,
felt so satisfied and gratified with what I was doing with SSP that I just decided, okay, I'm going to double down, and I'm a little bit of a risk taker, as you can tell. I left Amazon.
yeah.
I opened a gym during the pandemic. So, my threshold for risk is pretty high.
Yep.
Even though when I do take those risks, I suffer a tremendous amount of anxiety, as I go through that. But I
It's a
do
pretty
take the
unique, it's a
risk.
unique
Yeah.
combination. It's like you
Yeah.
do it even though you know it's going to be crazy
Exactly. I'm
painful.
like
Yeah.
crippled with anxiety. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. But so I just decided, and so I spent all of last year basically finding a space, signed the lease in early 2022, and then opened in May. And from there, it's just been kind of a sprint ever since.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I'm not opening a third location this year because that would be crazy and I need a break.
Mhm.
But yeah, the two was a lot for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's so impressive, Chris. I mean, I know not everyone's going to be a big risk taker, but the fact that you're able to take the risk and that you went through such a kind of a thoughtful and methodical decision-making process that you really were able to put it all on the table and say, which direction should I go? I can double down and keep opening locations. I can also hire a GM and step aside. And I just,
Mhm.
I think it's a really great takeaway for our listeners because all too often when we start our first business or, open our first gym location, it's like our baby, and the idea, people don't even entertain the idea of stepping away or closing
Yeah.
or selling it. And I think more
Yeah.
people should. I think more people should. I said to you somewhat jokingly but seriously before we started recording that I've been self-employed for over a decade, and about every 18 months I look at job postings.
Yeah.
I have no idea why. Like, I'm not particularly
Yeah.
unhappy. It's just there's something about, you know, I want to make sure that I am comfortable making
Yeah.
a different choice in my life. And
Yeah.
I think that the fact that you did that is really admirable and a great takeaway for our listeners.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the second location because one of the things that holds people back from
Mhm.
putting a second location is that people think it's maybe kind of double the complexity, but it's really not. It's more like quadruple the complexity.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that, you said before we started that you've been a little, it's one of your lessons learned is that having a second location really makes things more complex. So you can just kind of talk us through what you've been experiencing with that complexity.
Yeah, it is. It is way more complex than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And I think there's a few things. One is you create a culture within the gym that you have, right? And
Hmm.
that culture is super important to the way that it functions and the way that members feel about the gym and the community. Replicating that is not an easy feat, across a different location. And I looked at a few different options. One of them was well, do I just have a second location and have a completely different staff, and try and,
Mhm.
take the playbook from gym location 1 and put it on gym location 2 and have them work. And I just thought, I don't think that that's going to work very well. I think like it's so important for us to kind of maintain that culture. So what I did is I actually, our gyms are actually only 10 minutes apart. They're in distinct neighborhoods of Seattle, but people can actually travel between both. And so what I wanted to do was kind of create a one SSP feeling, right? And so I have all of my coaches and all of my staff go back and forth throughout the week. There's some coaches that stay at one more often than others, but really they're accessible and available for both. And so members
Mhm.
of both actually get to meet everybody. And we actually find more members now are just cross-pollinating. They come to class on Monday night at Finney Ridge, and then they go to class on Tuesday night at Queen Anne, and it's just an easy way for us to create a big community that way. So that's one way that I tried to counter that aspect.
Sure.
The other one is, I have a staff of 7 coaches, excluding me right now, and managing 2 locations off of that can be challenging, especially if one's on vacation, if a couple go down sick, because we've had
Mhm.
COVID, and so all of a sudden, when you only have 4 or 5 coaches, or even over the holidays, I only had 2 coaches. We got down to
Yep.
2 because it was an ice
Yep.
storm in Seattle and somebody was sick and it was crazy. And I was like, well, we cannot realistically manage 2 locations with 2 coaches, right? So I had to close down one location for 3 or 4 days, just
Mhm.
because I was like, we can't do it,
Yeah.
realistically. So it's those challenges that happen. And the complexity is really high, in terms of just managing that and trying to maintain a full staff, a full schedule, and a great culture that's synonymous across the 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, my friend. I think those are really very common challenges opening a second location. I love that you started with the culture because I think that's key. Often the
Mm-hmm.
analogy I think of when I think of, opening different locations is I know a lot of people made sourdough bread over COVID. I don't know if you ever made any sourdough bread,
I
right? But
did not.
ideally you start with this like existing kind of yeast that's been around for
Yeah.
a while. They call it like the
Yeah.
mother yeast, right? And you take a little piece of that and you keep feeding it and feeding it. And that's the piece that you use to make the next loaf of bread. And it's the
Sure.
same idea here. Right? Your initial location is kind of like that mother yeast, and you take some piece of it, some essence of it, some of its DNA, and put it in another place and hope that it grows an
Yeah.
equally delicious loaf of bread
Yeah,
that
for
has
sure.
some connection to the original. And the fact that you were able to do that really with your staff, that they were like the cornerstone, is if we take the
Yep.
staff and move them back and forth, and you could do this because of your actual locations, then that creates that's basically some of the DNA we're going to take with us, the new one. I think
Exactly.
that's really
Yep.
smart. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people open second locations, they're always not that close.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they'll do is they'll take one staff member, just put them over there permanently,
Yep.
which is a little bit of what we did at MFF. Even though we were both in Manhattan, they weren't close enough to really go back and forth in a given day
Yeah.
easily. And so I think good for you. I think that's a great solve to that. And then obviously the scheduling logistics is really
Mm-hmm.
tough, really
Really
tough.
tough.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Let me ask you this. Another thing that people find challenging with second location is managing just like staff performance, like having
Mm.
consistency of how things get done in 2 different kinds of spaces, in 2 different vibes with different communities around them. So how are you find, what's your experience like in streamlining kind of SOPs and processes at both places?
Yeah, I would say, we are flying. I always like to give the analogy that, especially last year, we were kind of flying an airplane while putting the engine in at the same time, and
Sure.
I thought of things like SOPs fell by the wayside, unfortunately, because we were just flying by the seat of our pants, just
Yep.
reacting to people coming in the gym, trying to create as good of experience as possible. Now we're starting to catch up on some of this stuff, and trying to create some consistency. But we did find that there were times where, let's say we're doing an assessment for a new client, and we had this down at our first location, Queen Anne, and it was like, okay, no problem. And then the second location, as we onboarded new staff, it wasn't quite as seamless, right? And
Hmm.
we got feedback from people that like, hey, this wasn't what I expected from an assessment. And then we actually looked at it and dug deep into it and realized, oh yeah, that's not what we should be doing, right? And so then we had to
Yep.
go back to the drawing table and say, wait, we need to make sure this is clearly documented across both locations. Like, here's how we manage the assessment process. Here's how you manage the conversation with the person, make them feel comfortable, get them in, and then move in, and all of those things are super important to standardize across the 2.
Yeah.
I think in terms of performance, um, I honestly believe a lot in developing people and staff. And so the people that were early on, the first couple of hires of mine, I've put them into leadership positions.
Hmm.
And, thankfully for my time at Amazon, I was given the opportunity to get a lot of training in this,
Yep.
and being able to
Yeah.
develop people. And so I have weekly one-on-ones, which are very in-depth, that they drive. And I have given them direct reports. And so the idea is that developing them as managers, so it doesn't all fall on me, and I can spend more time with them, developing them to be better leaders and to be better managers within the organization. And so that's kind of how I've been able to manage that piece.
Yeah, well said. I mean, there's so much in there that I think is really great takeaways for our listeners. I mean, one is that sometimes when you're growing and expanding, especially in second location, you kind of have to take a ready, fire, aim approach.
Yep.
Right? We're just like, you're just building, putting the engine in as you're flying.
Yep.
And sometimes that doesn't mean all your SOPs are dialed in before the door opens, right?
Does
You're
not.
just like making it work, right? But the thing that you did that I think is really maybe the most important takeaway in that is that you heard the feedback
Mm-hmm.
that it wasn't consistent. You heard the
Yep.
feedback that there's confusion here. We're not all doing the same shit. And you
Yeah.
addressed it. So I think that's huge to have that open line of feedback is fantastic. And then I think it's so smart to take all of your experience managing people from your past career and bring it
Mm-hmm.
into this. It's a place where I see new gym owners often fall on their face. Is
Yeah.
oftentimes people are opening gyms for the first time and it's their first time managing people. And
Mm-hmm.
that you really have such an advantage there that you've been doing this for many years. And so the fact that
Mm-hmm.
you have weekly one-on-ones and you're comfortable developing people into managers and leaders in your
Mm-hmm.
organization, I think is huge. I think it's a lot of what, I hear all the time that our listeners and past guests really struggle with. So I think it's a great advantage for you. That's huge.
Yeah. Thanks.
So let's talk a little bit about your kind of rapid growth. Because I
Mm.
mentioned, if you opened in the middle of COVID, end of
Mm-hmm.
2019, already have, close to 400 members. And one of the things I know you've said to me in the past that you've attributed this to is that you really embedded both locations into existing neighborhoods. So talk a little bit about that strategy for me.
Yeah, it wasn't even something that I did intentionally to begin
Hmm.
with, to be honest with you. I just found a space that I thought was great
Hmm.
over in a neighborhood called Queen Anne in Seattle, which just happened to be embedded into a neighborhood. And it was probably the smartest thing I've ever done because, especially during COVID, people weren't going into their offices, right? So they were working from home and they were craving some kind of interaction, some kind of social interaction and community. And so even with masks, even with like 20 feet of distance apart, in the gym, people were coming. And so, it was interesting because the first few months I opened in August, and then up until November, we kind of grew up to like 50 members, during the height of the pandemic. And it was cool. And we were starting to cultivate a community. And then we got shut down, like most people around the country in November, December. And at that point, I expected most of our members just to kind of pause or drop off. I mean, we switched to virtual, but I was like, oh man, this is going to kill the business. And thankfully, most of them stuck around.
Yeah.
And actually, they didn't even want to go virtual. They asked to work out outside in the middle of winter in Seattle.
Wow.
So I bought canopies and I literally set them up in my parking lot every morning
Wow.
with a member of my staff too, who was there. It was just me and her. And we trained people for 2 months out in the middle of winter in the cold in the parking lot. I mean, it was nuts. And people
That's
showed
incredible.
up, and so
That's
we
wild.
maintained, kind of the 50 members. And then when I opened in January again, 2021, we just started to see this like up and to the right effect, right?
Hmm.
And so throughout 2021, we went from 50 to 160 basically by the end of the year. And from there, once I started opening Finney Ridge, which is the other location in May, honestly, when we didn't even do that much marketing. We put on an A board outside of our
Mm.
location, again, nestled in a community, a lot of people walking with the ability to get there. By the time we opened, we had a wait list of over 100 people that
Wow.
had indicated their interest in signing up, which was like mind boggling to me.
Yep.
And so we did our best to onboard as many people, but literally in 2021, we went from, or 2022, we went from 160 to 350 members by the end of the year.
Wow.
And the great thing about us is that people seem to stick around. They seem to like us, which is nice, and I think one of the things I tell people, my team all the time, is I never want a member to feel like it's a transactional experience when they come into SSP.
Hmm.
There's a lot of gyms, especially chain gyms or or other types of gyms like that, where you show up, you're part of a 20-person class, the coach is there, kind of rah-rahs up, and then you leave, right? Nobody says your name, nobody talks to you, nobody has an interaction, nobody understands your life, you're not part of anything. And so we're very intentional about not only addressing members, but also within classes, trying to create community, trying to do a lot of partner work, trying to get people to talk. If I know somebody works at Amazon, this person works at Amazon, I'm introducing them. I'm trying to be very intentional about creating and cultivating community. Because I think ultimately what happens is that's what's, people come in because they want to learn how to strength train and they want to get stronger, whatever their goal is. And then all of a sudden, the community is like the glue. It keeps them around, right? And then they want to come work out with their friends. They want to come work out with the coaches, and they want to come just be part of everything. I have people that say they feel like they missed out on a day if they don't show up to SSP, and that's an important glue for the community and for our business.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. I think that the lesson I'm taking away from that one of several is just location, right? I mean, how incredible is it that you can put out a little A-frame sign and before you open, you have a wait list of 100 people that says you picked a place where there's existing engaging community and there's some foot traffic, people, and so that is such a huge, huge part of the game. And the fact that you've retained those folks, that you've created a culture and an experience that where they're making friends, they're making connections, and they want to come back is so huge. Let me ask you maybe one last question about expanding to multiple locations, and we'll start to wrap things up here, which is, imagine that you are going to open up a third location based on everything you know now and you've learned so far. Yeah. What would your approach be?
Honestly, like one of my goals this year is to create a SOP and a playbook for opening a location, right? So we have that kind of readily available. I would say, like, I honestly feel like the way that we opened up Finney Ridge was we were doing a lot of things that we wanted to be doing, right? And so I think that the first part of it, when we talk about location, is I actually call them, and I called this before I joined the Unicorn Society, I call them like unicorn neighborhoods or unicorn locations. Great. Right?
Love it.
Because I look for those specific kinds of neighborhoods. And I find a lot of fitness businesses don't look for those, and honestly, like the space, I think a lot of gym owners, they'll look at spaces first. They'll be like, oh man. And I did this when I was first looking at space. I was like, oh, this is 3,000 square feet. Imagine what I could do here. And it's in the worst possible neighborhood. The worst, right? Nobody is going to come to your gym. And so my space is, my space in Queen Anne is like 1,800 square feet. My space in Finney Ridge is 1,300 square feet. We operate on about 3,000 square feet of total floor space, right? At 370 members. And so, I would just urge people, like the space itself doesn't really matter. If you can envision a space in a gym working there, look at the community around you, who's actually going to be there. So I think that's number one, that's most important. Great. And then from there, it's, all the things I talked about, the culture piece and making sure that it's unified across the locations, that you get the right people into the space. All of those things I think are super important as well.
Yeah, I think that's really crucial. It's really crucial to make sure that you're really getting into a location where that can support the kind of avatar you're looking for, that can support the kind of community that you're looking for. You can have a fantastic, 9,000 square foot warehouse, but it's useless if it's not in the heart of a community, right, where people can get to it easily. And there's some people, I should say, the one exception, there's some people, and even some folks in the Unicorn Society, who are real destination places. In fact, Cressy is a good example of a destination place, right? But they're the exception to the norm for gyms 100%. In the US.
Totally, yes.
So and even MFF, to some extent, even though we're in Manhattan, we're in a neighborhood on a block that's kind of off the beaten path. And we've gotten away with it, but it's not the first choice I would make for a second or third location. Right. And so I think this is a really great roadmap to consider. So awesome. Well, I'm going to wrap things up because I could keep asking you questions all day about the great work you've been doing, but we've covered so much ground already. So thank you for being so open and sharing your experience. There's a lot of great takeaways for our listeners. It's been awesome to see what you've been able to accomplish in such a short period of time. If people want to learn more about you, Chris, or the gym, where do they find you on the internet?
Yeah, well, seattlesp.com is where you can go for SSP. If you want to find me specifically, I'm on LinkedIn if that's your jam. Also on Instagram, chris.travis, 3 S's. Great.
Great. I think I saw recently on LinkedIn you posted your year-end letter that you send to your clients. So I thought it was beautiful. So friends, go check them out on LinkedIn and give that a read. This was awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. And listeners, if you found this valuable, please leave us a 5-star review everywhere you listen. Email me, michael@businessforunicorns.com. Let me know what you want me to talk about next or who you want me to talk to. And I'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Michael.
Go, one final note. If you haven't checked out my YouTube channel yet, head to markfisheryoutube.com. I post videos twice per week and I cover all sorts of topics and tips to help you be even more successful at running a training gym. From time management to financial benchmarks to lead generation strategies, I have got you covered. Thanks in advance for subscribing and sharing with your training gym owner friends. My mission is to get this content out to every gym owner in the world. So your help means so much to me. Remember, that's markfisheryoutube.com. See you there.